I'm going to send it over to Thunder to start us off. And yeah, and then we'll be back to start the workshop.
Awesome. So good morning, everyone. My name is Thunder, and I come from Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. My pronouns are he, they, but I prefer he. I am 20 years old, and I am mixed race. I am Trinidadian, Ojibwe, Mohawk, and I got a little bit of mixing from the Isles in me, so a little bit of Skyrish, Scottish, and Irish. But maybe I'll start saying I'm Skyrish. So today we're talking about what to me sounds like kind of learning to harmonize with creation. And when I say that, I mean, it's a really beautiful part of creation where not only those birth workers and those birthers come together, but those helpers come together, and all of the family members that are going to help. And it's just a really beautiful thing. And I really love talking about womb time stuff, and moon time stuff. So this is really exciting for me. I want to start off today with a song, but first, I think I'm going to tell you a little bit about, I'm trying to find words to talk to you because I'm not technically allowed to repeat certain parts of the teaching that I want to kind of summarize for you. So it's okay. I'll figure it out. I'm just picturing my auntie laughing so hard at me right now. Aruna's probably losing it laughing. So in the Meday Lodge, I'm not Meday, but in the Meday Lodge, we talk about this time in creation before you were lowered down to earth. And you're actually met with all of the people in your life that are going to help you. So the people who are going to bring you here, like sperm donor, for example, right? The person who is going to provide the eggs and all of those types of things, maybe who's going to end up carrying you. Hey, the doctors who are going to be part of that process, right? Or the friends that are going to be, or the uncles or the aunties or the relatives who will be at home during that process, whichever way you do it. So your helpers, those ones that'll physically help you come down from Star World. And then you're also going to have the people who are going to teach you. So all of your teachers, the ones that you really meet in your early years, the ones who teach you through your adolescence and through those really, really big changes in life. The teaching that I received upon hearing this for the first time was actually that before you come here, and your life as a whole is actually represented as a lodge. So when you're first entering that lodge, before you come in is this point with creation. And so in that point, you're talking directly with Creator themselves. So it's not you and your parents or you and whomever. It's literally you in creation, and every single thing that you need to know that you will ever possibly need to know about your life, you are told in that time. So when I think of that time for myself, I think of my mom passing. And during this series, I kind of bring that up a bit because we're talking about adoption and all of the ways in which littles come into your life. And for me, adoption and fostering has been really complicated, but also really beautiful in my life. So for me, when I think of that moment of being with Creator at creation before I came, I was with my mother and my father, but I was also with my aunties and my uncles and all of the incredible family that holds me up today and really helps me get through. I just thought that's a really cute way to kind of start the session talking about that personal lodge. So I think I'm actually going to sing a healing song because I'm having a bit of a rough body time lately. I've been having some health complications. So I think to start us off, I'm going to sing a healing song. I don't have a whole lot of air in my lungs. So I believe I'm gonna have to stand for this one. But this song is going to be Healing Song, Quinn's Healing Song by Brenda McIntyre. Hey oh, hey hi hey oh, hey hi hey hey oh, hey 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 oh, hey hi hey oh, hey hey oh, hey Ooh. So me glitch everyone for allowing me to share and open up in a good way. I hope that brought you a little bit of medicine. I know it's always good medicine for me to open by singing, and I've been singing every day for the past week and just really moving through. So, miigwech, goa. Love you all.
Thank you so much, Thunder. That was so beautiful. Yeah, I really love being able to open up with you and with singing and with the songs and with those reflections. I think it's a really important way to begin these conversations, and I'm hoping that that's something that we can continue to do throughout today's session and the sessions that we have coming up, is to really ground it in the experience and wisdom of BIPOC community and BIPOC family making and community planning, especially considering the way the world is right now. So yeah, so thank you so much, Thunder. We have the transcript, live transcript going as well. So that will be also something that we'll have in the recording, which is great. So we're gonna get right into it. And so I'm gonna share my screen and start the presentation. So what we'll do also is, if folks have questions, hold on, what's happening here? Oh yeah, okay, here we go. If folks have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat. I might not see it during the chat, but I will be trying to look at it as much as possible. And so please feel free to type as we go. And then if there's anything at the end of it, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. But yes, and yes, thank you so much again to Thunder. Thank you for saying that. So I can see the chat while I'm presenting, so that's great. So if you have questions throughout, please feel free to just jump in at any point and ask any questions that you have, and then we'll go from there. Awesome. So we're going into egg, sperm, and a place to grow. So I just want to shout out Chris Feldovin and Andy Inkster and Rachel Epstein and all the folks who have really put a lot, and Neela, who have really put a lot of work into creating what I'm sharing today. So this is not coming out of me being an expert. This is directly as a result of a lot of different people's work throughout the years. So I kind of want to just give them a shout out because they are the people behind the work that I've put together today. This is coming from a workshop that I created when I was working somewhere else. Obviously very different info and stuff, but the material is updated for now, but very similar stuff in terms of how queer and trans communities are able to talk about our bodies in a different way, and then also offer different ways to connect on how we create our families, and the very like DIY beautiful ways that we are able to family plan that a lot of many more normative families, you know, are do. So we figure it out and we make way and we make do. And that's what's so beautiful about our communities, especially when we don't have the money for things or we don't have the same kind of resources or access. So we've made it work and we have lots of queer spawn all over the place. Yeah, so let's get into it. Oh no, here we go. Okay. So Anna, I don't know if you want to jump on and just kind of talk a little bit first about what Birthmark does, just so folks have an idea.
Sure. Hi, folks. My name's Anna. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the program ambassador with the Seed and Sprout program, so part of the Birthmark team. Birthmark is an organization that provides full spectrum doula support as well as programming to families who might not otherwise be able to access doula support. And that includes a pretty broad range of folks, including through the Seed and Sprout program to us LGBTQ folks. So we offer birth doula services, postpartum doula services, abortion doula support. We also have a donation center. So if there's anything you need in terms of pregnancy supplies, baby supplies, supplies for kids up to 6, we have a lot of things at our office, which is down on Spadina in the CSI building. We also have a number of classes and clinics which are free to Birthmark clients and by donation for everyone else. And that includes things like yoga, mindfulness. We have a naturopathic doctor. We have lactation support, parenting workshops, infant CPR. And a lot of those programs are happening right now. So our Building Blocks program, which provides support around pregnancy, postpartum, is running right now, and you can join that through our website. Our website is there on the slide, birthmarksupport.com, and you can join any of those programs there. I'll put links into the chat for our Seed and Sprout programs. We currently have 2 monthly groups, and one of them is Aruna's, so maybe I'll let them talk more about it.
Thanks for that, Anna. And so, yeah, the one that Anna's talking about, sorry, I went forward anyways, but we have a solo parent, single solo autonomous parent group that meets the last Wednesday of every month. And I facilitate that. It's a lot of really great folks who come out every month and talk about lots of different things. So yeah, if you're interested in talking about, or if you're considering, doing this as a solo parent or going forward as a solo parent, please definitely come and hang out and talk to us. We're happy to. We have a lot of folks who are currently pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant. And it's really great to just for them to just observe what it's like, and some of the things that come up for us. So yeah, and I'm an autonomous parent. I'm a single parent or solo parent by choice. And so if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to talk to you about that as well. Okay, so let's get right into it. So today, this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about eggs. We're going to talk about uteruses and embryos. We're going to talk about sperm, which I think is a big question for a lot of folks going down this path. We're going to talk about ICI, or home insemination. A lot of folks know it as, or DIY. We're going to talk about IUIs, IVF, fertility clinics. And then a big piece about this, and particularly if you're going to go the fertility clinic route, is advocacy and some considerations. And then we'll get into Q&A and what your next steps are. So I want to begin actually by this. So this kind of, just to make sure we're all on the same page, people had different, connections around how they understand bodies and how bodies work. This is a very great book if you have little people in your life, or for yourself, you just want to learn or think about know how babies are made. But this is a really great book that we're going to listen to together, that's being read by Corey Silverberg, who is the person who wrote this book. So yeah, I'm just going to let it speak for itself.
They're made. The first thing you need to know is you can't make a baby out of nothing. You have to start with something.
The audio is not working.
This is a sperm. Not all bodies have sperm in them. Some do, and some do not. Inside the sperm, just like inside the egg, there are so many stories all about the body the sperm came from. When grown-ups want to make a baby, they need to get an egg from one body and sperm from another body. They also need a place where the baby can grow. This is a uterus. It is a place where a baby can grow. You might think that everyone has a uterus, since it has the words you and us in it, but not everyone has a uterus. Just like eggs, and just like sperm, some bodies have a uterus, and some bodies do not. Every body that has a uterus has it in the same place, just below the belly button, in the squishy middle part. When an egg and a sperm meet, they swirl together in a special kind of dance. As they dance, they talk to each other. The egg tells the sperm all the stories it has to tell about the body it came from. And the sperm tells the egg all the stories it has to tell about the body it came from. When their dance is done, they are not two things anymore. They danced around and shared so much, they became one brand new thing. At first, it is just a tiny thing. Sometimes this tiny thing does not grow, and sometimes it grows into a baby, like you did. Who helped bring together the sperm and the egg that made you? Who was happy that it was you who grew? Everything that grows, grows differently. Each of us grow in our own way. How a baby grows depends on the stories that the egg and the sperm share and on the uterus the baby is growing inside of. But before a baby can be born, it has to get bigger and bigger and bigger. This usually takes about 40 weeks. Sometimes the baby is ready to come out on its own. Sometimes a midwife or a doctor will be the one to say it is time for the baby to be born. No matter who decides, the baby does not just hop out by itself. Some babies are born by coming out through a part of the body that most people call the vagina. And other times, doctors will make a special opening below the belly button, take the baby out, and then close up the hole. Whichever way the baby comes out, it's a pretty big deal for the baby. It's also a pretty big deal for the people who waited and waited and waited for the baby to be born. Sometimes it takes a long time, sometimes it's quick. Sometimes it hurts a little, and sometimes it hurts a lot. But usually everyone needs a lot of rest afterwards. Who was waiting for you to be born?
Amazing. So, yeah, I hope you like that. That's a really good book and great resource that I use with little people in my life, and then also in a lot in these workshops, because I often notice that, because, our health education unfortunately doesn't really offer very much, and we all come from different backgrounds and different experiences of bodies and body education. Some people don't really know a lot of or some of these things. So hopefully it was informative. If not, it was just also really cute. And then also, I hope that, yeah, it's a great one. And it's also, it's available online for free on YouTube. So please share with people. I don't know for you, but from when I first read that, a lot of that, the last question is like, who was waiting for you to be born? I think that what I want to also kind of open up with and start having you think about on this journey is to think about, the emotional impact that this process has. And we have to be very intentional about an understanding of what this might bring up for you. So, I mean, as much as this is a very physical process of egg, sperm, uterus, physical, body stuff, bodies are also connected to how we emotionally feel about our bodies and any kind of trauma we have, but also, familial experiences and trauma as a kid, and also potentially as a baby, and how that's going to, impact our experience on this journey. So I just want you to think about that as you're thinking through these things for yourself. And then also taking an opportunity to take some time with yourself and your partner, if you're doing this with a partner or partners, or your family or your community, whoever you're choosing to go down this path with, to really think about what it means for you to go and do this work. So I just wanted to offer that as an opportunity to really tap into what's going to come up for you and how you feel about the possibility of making a baby, which is very exciting and also comes with all of the many emotions that will come up. So, yeah.
They're made.
Oh.
The first.
Okay, there we go. So I just want to also start with a disclaimer. This is not medical information, legal information, or clinical advice. This is particularly information. All of this information can be found online and cannot be considered more than an educational forum for information. If you are starting your fertility or reproductive journey, please consult your family physician, specialist, or fertility clinic for more information that is specific to you. And this in particular, this workshop and this session is Ontario in Canada specific. So I know there's some folks who might be watching from the States. I know there's a few Ontarios in the US, but this is specifically to Canada and the Ontario-based specifics. So any laws or legislation that I'm talking about today, any medical supported access to us LGBTQ plus specific or supportive services, that it may be different or not even covered where you're located. So please seek out local supports and information specific to your province or your country. So the first thing we're going to talk about is eggs. I thought it was cute with the little eggs. I had a lot of fun making this PowerPoint, by the way. I'm sure you can tell. So the first thing we're going to talk about is eggs. So there's two different things that we have to consider. If you look at your family and your family structure of who is in your family, the first thing you have to ask is if you have eggs. So does anyone in your family have eggs? If you have them, then that's great. Then that means maybe an intended parent has eggs. Maybe you have a known donor, maybe a family member or somebody who's going to be donating their eggs, or you have an unknown donor. So you've already looked into a donation program. On the other hand, if you don't have eggs, then you might have to find a co-parent who does have eggs. You might have to consider looking at a donor, or you can consider an unknown donor. So we're going to get into what that all means in a second. But the first thing is the question is that you have to ask yourself, do I have eggs? You do, that's great. So what happens when an intended parent has eggs? So what do you know about your own fertility? So that's the first thing. So if you are a person with eggs, thinking about, do I know my cycles? What do I know about my fertility? Have I had STIs that might have impacted my fertility later on? Those are all things to consider in thinking about what you need to know for your own fertility. For trans folks who with eggs, who are considering using their eggs or want to use their eggs, that's something to think about in terms of any hormones that you're on. So folks who are on hormones will have to consider being off hormones for a particular amount of time in order to get the eggs that they're using. And if you're carrying, then that's a whole different thing. And so that's something that you need to speak to specifically your physician about, and also a fertility specialist if you'd like. So that's a very particular process, especially coming off of hormones and doing that work. And then another question you have to ask yourself is, would you want to carry the embryo yourself? So just because you have eggs doesn't mean you're going to carry, right? Or be the gestational carrier. It could mean that you have eggs and you don't want to carry the baby yourself. You could want to maybe donate your eggs or have the eggs extracted and then given to someone else who's going to carry, or your partner. And that's when we talk about reciprocal IVF. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about IVF. But that would be something where you would you as a person with eggs would then transfer your eggs to your partners or your other co-parent or intended parent who is going to be carrying the pregnancy, but not using their eggs. They're using your eggs to create an embryo. And then also thinking about what your timeline is, right? So depending on your age, depending on your process, where you are in your journey of parenthood, what is your timeline and what are you going to do? And if you are a trans person with eggs, thinking about, coming off of hormones or thinking about surgeries, if that's something that you're doing, then thinking about how that's going to also factor into the process and what your timeline looks like. Okay, so the next thing here is thinking about eggs and if you have them or if you don't have them. So where you would find a known egg donor where you could find someone is maybe through your family. So this is where you could, if you don't have an egg in your family, this is where you would be able to find one. So if you wanted to go the known donor route, you could ask your family, you could ask your friends, you could put a call out to the community. Sometimes what happens is a lot of folks have written up emails being like, hey, this is our family, this is what we need. Please send this to people who you think might be interested. And so folks will send it to friends of friends or acquaintances. So you might get it that way. And then there's also websites. So there are some websites for known egg donors or people who are willing to donate their eggs. And sometimes also, you know, I've had some folks in my workshops that have been like, I found an egg donor on Craigslist. I mean, that's also what is possible out there, right? So if you know people, or if you are connected with folks who are connected to folks, or, you know, in different ways, there are many ways to find egg donors, especially in different communities. It's important to remember that egg donors in Canada, and sperm donors also, but we'll get into sperm in a bit, cannot be paid for donation. So it is illegal to accept money or give money for donation of any reproductive material. So if you are donating your eggs, you cannot expect to be paid, but you can be paid for incidentals. So anything that is related to the egg donation. So if you have to go to doctor's appointments, or if you have to buy any kind of medication, or if you have to be off work because the medication really impacted your ability to be at work, they could pay for your food or your supplements and things like that. So anything that's related to egg donation or any kind of donor material cannot be paid directly for the service or for the exchange, but they can be paid for actual expenses related to the donation. And so if you want an unknown donor, so you don't know who these people are, you could go through an egg bank. So there are egg banks through, in particular in Ontario, there's RepoMed, there's Can-Am Cairo. There's a few other banks that have egg banks available, and people who have donated eggs, or sometimes has done IVF and had too many eggs and didn't want to do all of them through IVF and then donated the rest of them. It could also be an acquaintance. So if there is enough separation from you and the person that's donating, it could be technically considered an unknown egg donor. And if someone is in the middle, so let's say, for example, I put it out to a few of my friends, and then a friend of a friend of a friend decides that they are, yeah, you know what, I can donate my eggs, and someone is willing to be the middle person, then you can go through a fertility clinic, and that can be something that you are able to do with someone who's connected to you, but not really connected to you. Often that doesn't happen because people really want to actually connect with the person, and also, you know family history and have conversations and get paperwork done. So that doesn't often happen. And the most prominent way of doing unknown egg donor would be through the egg bank. But also it can happen. So yeah. So yeah, let's go next one. So let's say you need an egg or a sperm or a uterus, or someone who wants to carry. These are just some tips and some tools to start thinking about, okay, so I don't have eggs and I need eggs. And I know someone who's willing to, or, we've had a little bit of a conversation, but we need to talk about it still. Or if, you need sperm, for example, and this is a big conversation that a lot of people want to have, how do I approach people about sperm donation, especially for a known donor? Or, like my sister has mentioned once that she would be willing to carry because I can't carry a baby, or I can't be the gestational carrier, but I can use my eggs, for example. These are some things to think about. So it is important to have in-depth conversations with folks who are potentially going to be a known donor and who is also going to be a carrier. There may be opportunities to we'll need to write up a co-parenting agreement. So if you are considering co-parenting or finding co-parents specifically to who have different pieces of the puzzle, so if they have an egg or sperm or a uterus, you will want to consider writing up co-parenting agreements. It is not necessary by law to do that, but it is really important to do that because of the ways in which things happen. So For legal purposes, if we want to talk about legal stuff, we're going to have a workshop out also in a few weeks on the legalities around co-parenting, specifically because it is a big conversation. But for co-parents, so when you're registering the birth of your child, you have an opportunity to name up to 4 people as parents on a birth certificate in Ontario. They don't have to be married people. They don't have to be partners. They can literally be, if 4 friends are coming together and want to co-parent a child together, they can now do that in Ontario and all be named as legal guardians. If, for example, though, if people are worried about what could happen, if at birth something happens to the person that's giving birth, and then there's 3 other people in the room, and they're like, we haven't even been able to register this birth, that's where co-parenting agreements are very important. That's where the co-parenting agreement can actually be a document that allows to show the intention that this intended parent, or the birth parent, had these 3 other intended parents already set up and ready to go. So that's why co-parenting agreements are very important when you're, even before the person gets pregnant. It's very important to understand people's roles. And it could be also, you could consider family members, friends, community members, acquaintances, or online connections as potential co-parents. There are actually Facebook groups right now. There's a Co-Parent Canada, I think. I'm not sure if the website's still there, but there was a co-parenting website, for example, on that actually had, people who were like, I'm looking for sperm, or I'm looking for eggs, I'm looking for a co-parent. And that was a way that people found each other. So that's another way. And Laura, I see your question, so I'm going to get to that in a second. And then consider all possibilities for compatibility. So just because someone has sperm and wants to co-parent with you, and just because someone has an egg or a uterus and wants to co-parent with you, doesn't mean that might be the right choice, right? So you really want to think about what you want for your family, and compatibility in terms of parenting. If I was going to co-parent with someone who, I don't even know. I can't even imagine co-parenting with someone, to be honest. But if I was going to co-parent with someone that, for example, had different political values as me, could I do that? Is that a must-have for compatibility? If they're going to raise my child as a Trump supporter, I don't know if I could do that, right? So thinking about what is possible for you in terms of compatibility for parenting is so important, as opposed to, oh, you have this and that, and this is what I need to get pregnant. People do it all the time. I mean, often people who are, having sex and partnerships, don't actually think about these things or have these conversations before. And so they end up co-parenting with people and then divorcing later on, that in ways that they didn't, anticipate, and things come up as you go and change. So it's important to think about what things are really important for you as a parent, and as a community, and as a co-parenting situation. I often like to tell people to think of it as dating, but for a parent. So you're speed dating, but you're looking for a co-parent. The same questions you'd want for compatibility for a partner, you would want for a parent, or for a co-parent. So something to think about in terms of how you're doing that. And so Laura asked, are there examples of co-parenting agreements that you would recommend? Absolutely. There's lots actually online. So lots of people have actually put up sample co-parenting agreements. I would say that in a co-parenting agreement, what you want to have is, you want to sit down with folks and be like, okay, so what are we even down to the these details of what is the baby going to call you, and how often are they going to see grandparents, and how are we going to make how is decision making going to be? So I had, in a class that I had previously taught, there was a 4 parents that were trying to get pregnant, and they had a baby, and their co-parenting agreement was 45 pages or something. So you could go that end where you literally, and they had every single possibility and detail in there, in cases of emergency, or what happens at school, or where are they going to go to school. So they had already talked about the first 10 years of this kid's life and all the possibilities that could come up with that. So that's a possibility for an agreement. Other people that I've talked to, and others, co-parenting agreements that I've seen have been okay, well, this is how we're going to deal with conflict, right? Because that's the biggest thing you want to talk about. And then the other pieces of it are going to be, okay, well, this is what's going to happen in an emergency. This is what's going to happen when, this is what our co-parenting arrangement is for when they come to my house. This is what they're going to call me. These are the things that are like non-negotiables. So again, the same conversations that you would probably have, in a relationship around conflict, you would want to have with this co-parenting situation. I hope that answers your question, Laura. But yeah, it depends on what you and your co-parent want and need, and how you want to build that for each other and with each other, and in the group, if it is a group, if it is more than two people. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to talk specifically before we get into this next piece, on the next workshop. So our next workshop is happening on Saturday, August 21st from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And you can actually check all the information on the Seed and Sprouts Facebook page, or just even look up fertility Seed and Sprout and it should come up. But it's actually going to be on mapping and learning about your own fertility. So it's actually going to be an opportunity for us to talk about the very specifics of how to create eggs, how to create follicles. And I'm hoping to bring in a naturopath also to talk a little bit about the ways that natural medicine can also support our bodies to really amp up the quantity and quality of eggs and embryos and sperm count and things like that, because that's a really important piece of when we're really, we're doing this very intentionally, and it's really a really hard process on our bodies. We want to be able to be as successful as possible, right? So, and if we can do that in natural ways, using natural medicine, then that's always a great thing. So, we're going to be talking specifically about cycle monitoring and what that looks like if you're doing it at home versus if you're doing it in a clinic. And then we're also going to talk about the different ways that we can actually start doing that on our own. So just wanted to point that out. And if folks want information on that, we can drop in the link for the next Facebook page so that you can register for that as well. Okay, so embryos, what are they? So embryos are the result of an egg and a sperm coming together. And so what that means is when you have that, that's what the embryo actually goes into the uterus. So it's something that goes into the uterus. I'm not going to explain all of this now because that's what we're going to talk about at our next workshop. But essentially, the process is that you would have a person with sperm and a person with eggs. They would put those two together, and those create the embryo that then gets kind of stuck on the uterine lining of the uterus, and that's what creates a baby. Well, first a fetus and then a baby. And so the big question for you in thinking about your family planning is, can your family create your own embryos? So do you have the sperm and do you have the egg? And do you have a plan for that in order to create the embryos? If you don't have the ability to create embryos because you're missing an egg or you're missing a sperm, or because you have had fertility issues and you have a difficult time creating embryos based on your egg or your partner's eggs or your partner's sperms, then there is something called the embryo donation program. And so there are donation programs that are available through fertility clinics. The fertility clinic that I used, which was Create, they have a really big one. And so that's something that you can start speaking to your family physician about, and also seeing how you can talk to different fertility clinics about what's available. And so that's an option as well. And then so what that does is then once you have the embryo, then it goes to the uterus. So does someone in your family have a uterus? And if they don't, then that means that you need to find someone who's going to carry this baby, because you need to have someone who's going to carry the baby. Even if you have a uterus in your family, so let's say, me and my partner both have uteruses, but maybe I don't want to, maybe I had surgery or something that means that I can't carry a baby, or I don't have access to my uterus in the same way, and my partner doesn't want to carry, then you still need to find a uterus to create, to put the embryo in. So even if I was able to use my eggs, I may not want to use my uterus to carry. And so in that case, we need to think about surrogacy. And so surrogacy includes the person. So what it means is that I'm sure people have heard of surrogates, but essentially what that means is the surrogate is the one that's going to carry the embryo to full term to create the baby. And so it means, and it could involve the surrogate's eggs, but we're gonna touch on surrogacy because that actually is a very big thing that we really need to spend some more time on. So if you don't have a uterus, then you need to consider surrogacy. And that's something that is another option as well that's available. Oh, gotta click. Okay. And now we're going to talk about sperm, which is the big one that a lot of folks have questions about. So if you have sperm, it means that either you're an intended parent and your family has sperm, you have a known donor who's going to provide sperm, or you're looking at an unknown donor. So you're looking at someone like in a bank. If you don't have sperm, then you need to find a co-parent with sperm, or you need to find a known donor, or you need to find an unknown donor. If there is an intended parent or someone in your family, or if you are also talking to a known donor that has sperm, then you have to think about the following things. So what do you know about your own fertility, or what does a sperm donor or the person with sperm know about their own fertility? And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. What are some things to think about when it comes to sperm? Trans folks with sperm, if people are on hormones or pre or post-op considerations, those are some things that you need to also consider with your family physician or with a specialist. But oftentimes there might mean that you might need to come off hormones for a little bit. But there are things that we can do before or after. So if you are in a family, or if you have a donor who is someone who is considering donation or has that, has sperm that you were going to use in your family, then it's also a consideration around your timelines, right? So timelines, depending on surgeries, depending on hormones, depending on your own family planning, those are all things that you need to consider if an intended parent has sperm and is needing to consider the other things that are happening in their life. And then another question is, have they done testing yet? So that's specifically for motility, the sperm count, STIs, HIV, things like that. That will give you an opportunity to understand the full picture of what needs to be considered in the family planning process. So an example of what I mean in that is, if you have a sperm donor who is a known donor who has very low motility, then what that means is that you have to consider, like, what are the options around potential successes in your pregnancy. So low motility means like the fastness of the actual sperm. So how fast is the sperm going? And then the count is how many sperm per donation do you have? So if you have a low count and low motility, that will impact the ability for the sperm to meet the egg and create a viable embryo. And so we need to really think about what those things are going to look like and how that's going to impact your ability to create your family. Are there any questions so far? This is a lot of information. Feel free again to ask any questions if you need to. And because I know that's a lot of stuff. So again, if you don't have, these are something to consider, or where you can find sperm. So if you have a known donor, that could be from a family, friend, community member, acquaintance, websites. And when I mean websites, it could be, there's lots of, there's actually a Facebook group for sperm donors, for folks who are willing to donate sperm. So that's also something that you can look at as well. If you're looking at the unknown donor sperm donor, then that could also be through sperm banks. So there's lots of sperm banks in the States. There's lots in Canada there, and in particular in Ontario, there's only a few that are Canadian. They have to be Canadian compliant in order for them to be either shipped to Canada or for you to get them. A lot of folks actually, because there's such limited options in Canada, will actually go across the border, buy sperm from a sperm bank in the States, do their insemination in the States, and then come back. So that's also something that I know a lot of queer and trans folks have done, because they want to also have sperm that reflects their family. And that's often not the case, especially for people of color and BIPOC people in Canada. Another option for unknown sperm donors is websites. So actually there is a family, a queer family, who found a person off Craigslist. The person they met up at I think they said a Tim Hortons or something. I won't speak for them. It was like it was a really amazing hilarious sounding experience where they were able to get the sperm donation, and then they literally, like, in the backseat of their car did their insemination. So so it's possible. You could definitely find people on Craigslist. I'm not so sure now because Craigslist is very unfortunately has been you know, a lot of the options have been taken off, but I'm sure there's ways that people are still connecting with each other there. Another option, a lot of folks used to do this back in the day too. And, you know, if we hear about the earlier days of a lot of like lesbians and queer women who wanted to have babies but didn't have the option of sperm banks, didn't have the option of asking friends, they would literally just go to bars and have sex and then get pregnant. So not the most, you know, not the most traditional way for that we want to do things now, but that is definitely an option, and it is a very viable option that gets people pregnant. So yeah, so that's definitely something. Of course, you have to consider with websites like Craigslist and anonymous sex, things like the potential for, you know, not knowing, like testing, not knowing where people's statuses are, things like that. So that's something that you have to consider, but I mean, it's also another option. So we also have friends of friends, and that's also, it can be an unknown, again, same thing with an egg donation. If it's someone, a friend of a friend, that someone else is kind of being the in-between and you don't know who they are, it could technically be a sperm donor, but that an unknown sperm donor, but of course it's just a separation of the degrees of separation. That will also mean that it could be the same thing as a known sperm donor. And same thing with community members. So just because you don't know them directly doesn't mean that someone doesn't know, and then it escalates. So you have to consider what that means for your own privacy and also for how you want your family to be. And if an unknown donor is where you want to go and you want that anonymous, no connection to your kid situation, then friends of friends and community members might be a little bit more difficult for that. So things to consider with sperm in particular. And you have to think about what's important to your family, right? So what is important for you? What do you need? Also, another thing to think about is what kind of sperm. So if you're going through an unknown sperm bank, there are different options for how you're going to be connected to that sperm donor. So there's open ID, there's ID release donors. And so with that option, you know, there's options where when the kid is 18, they might be able to connect with their sperm donor if the sperm donor allows for that. And then there's just straight up anonymous donors where you will never talk to them. They will never have access to them. There's also things to consider, like, do you want them to know their donor siblings? Because once you have a donor, especially a frozen or an unknown donor, there's always the potential for that other people in the world, and especially in North America or in the States and in Canada, people have also used that donor. So they also have children that are donor siblings of your child. Do you want your kids to know them? Do you want to be connected to those families? So those are all things to consider in what you want to do. Legal implications are important. So it depends on whether or not you're a known donor, or you're getting a known donor, unknown donor, and what that looks like. Again, as I said before, motility is important to consider for sperm, testing for donors, morphology. So the actual shape of the sperm itself can also impact a lot of things like genetic testing, things like that. And then also sperm counts. So if the sperm count is low, then it means that it might not create the embryos fast, so it might need more tries. And then so also thinking about sperm banks and being in a very medicalized process. So thinking about yourselves, right? And remember, as I was saying earlier, this is a very emotional and physical process. You have to consider what the impacts are going to be on you and your family, and how you're going to actually cope with the ways that it's going to, how you're going to see it happen, right? So you really have to consider what that looks like. And a lot of folks, especially in the queer and trans community, have a really hard time with medical spaces because they're not designed for us. They're not kind to us. And especially if you're also fat, if you're also working class, if you're also a Black or Indigenous person, those are all things to consider in how you're going to interact with these spaces, and also what things you need in order to feel the safest possible, and also to have the support you need going into it. So really thinking about what and how you're going to be met in these spaces, and also how people are going to interact with you. And then also consider freezing or creating embryos. So that is an option as well. When you are at that point where you've created the embryos and you're done your process, then the next thing that you can consider is, what are you going to do with the rest of the embryos? And we can talk about that on like at the next workshop, because that is going to be something we talk about. But that is also an option that you can save it for later on afterwards. And then what is important to your family in terms of race, in terms of genetics, in terms of, like your backgrounds and how you want to be reflected, and how you want your children to be reflected into that. That's also something to consider. And that also then brings into the question of what is actually available, right? So there is a huge lack of donations and donors specifically for Black, Indigenous, and people of color when it comes to sperm and egg donations, and particularly even worse in Canada. So if you were looking specifically at Canadian donors or Canadian banks, there are only a few, and the donors that are BIPOC are very, very low. So if you are looking for donors, that might be also consideration in how you understand whether or not you get a known donor versus an unknown donor. Because if you're looking at sperm banks, you might also not have very many options to begin with. So you might want to consider, are there people in your community that are more reflective of who you want to have in your family? That would be useful. Yeah. So this is a really big slide, and I'm just going to go over it, and I'll try not to take too much time with this. But the reason why this is important is, I think, because this is a very common question when people are considering fertility and also the fertility path, is thinking about that big question of like, do we go with unknown or do we go with known? And so I'm just going to go through each one, and if people have questions about any of this, please feel free to ask. So for known donors, it can be free or low cost, right? So we're going to get into how we're doing these things in a bit, but it could mean, you have a conversation with a donor, they donate, you don't have to pay money for the donation, because remember, you cannot pay people for the reproductive material. You cannot pay the donor for the sperm. So even if they decide that they want to, if they're like, oh, I need money to, like, I don't know why they would need money, but in case that, for sperm donation, it's a little different, because egg donation is very invasive and intense and a very big process. But for sperm donation, if they need something, you could pay for incidentals, but you cannot pay them directly. So it is free to low cost. You have the ability to ask more questions, get to know their history, get more accurate testing. They have a genetic connection to the child, so you have and know that genetic connection. If that's important to you, but you also have to manage that relationship, right? So if you have someone who, at first doesn't want anything to do with it, fine, yeah, I just want to donate, that's not a big deal. And then later on they meet the child and they're like, wow, this is a child that I'm connected to, I really want to be connected to. You have to be able to manage that connection and that relationship. They will potentially have connection with the child and contact. Another person could be involved potentially in the child's life, depending on how they want to be involved. They could be available though for many attempts. So when I mean attempts, it means that, like, you might not get pregnant on the first try. And so if you're not getting pregnant on the first try, it might mean that you might have to do it over and over or continuously. There are limited options if you don't have a lot of people with sperm in your life. So if you don't have I personally don't have a lot of people with sperm in my life, I wouldn't even know where to begin to ask, but that would be where maybe the community could come in and really support you in trying to find someone. And then for unknown donors, it can be very costly. So this $500 is on the lowest end. You probably, to be honest, won't find sperm vials less than 750 at this point. So it is very costly. You can choose to contact though in relationship with the donor. So as I said, you could choose to have it completely anonymous, never connected at all. You could choose at 18 years, the kid can choose if they want to, or they can just be open ID where they're available whenever. Sperm is available on your schedule, not the donor's. So another thing for known donor is, while you could have multiple attempts, if they decide to go on vacation for that month that you're ovulating or that you're ready to go, they might not be available to donate the sperm with known donors also, unless they're freezing their sperm. you have to be ready, right? So when you ovulate, the next step is you do the DIY if you're doing it at home, unless you're freezing it and then doing an IUI in a clinic. So they have to be available on, sperm is available on your schedule for frozen or unknown, not the donors. There's no social complications with donors because they're usually not in your community even, because a lot of the donations mostly are from the States. Limited information or unverifiable testing. So I'm sure you've heard stories about people getting donations, donors that they thought, were a PhD, and then they find out that they actually never went to college, or, silly things like that. The way that things are done in sperm banks is that they have an application. They verify some things, but they cannot verify everything. And so they don't ask for diplomas. They don't ask for, they only do the base testing to make sure that, the person doesn't have any STIs, or they don't have any like glaring big genetic things. But other than that, they're not really testing things or verifying anything. So they're going off of what the donor says about themselves. Oftentimes in the States, especially because donors are donating like in college, they're actually not, they're just like, they're kind of kids still, right? They're like in their early 20s. They haven't decided if they're going to do their PhD. They might want to, but then they might also just drop out of college the next year. Like you can't really like decide, you can't really know what their plan is. So if that's important to you, then that's something to think about as well. You have limited options and availability. As I said before, there's not very many options for BIPOC people, and there's no legal implications later on for custody, but also that is true for known donors as well. For the legalities around known donors, if you have someone who is known donor who is donating to you directly, the law in Ontario now, and since 2017, says that they cannot, if there's an intention to just donate, which means that you should probably write an agreement with them so that they sign, that they say that they have no parental rights over this child, then the next step would be that if they tried to get parental rights, they probably would be unsuccessful, considering the law changed that said that if someone is donating their reproductive material for the purposes of assisted reproduction, so if they're, donating and then freezing or giving for an IUI or IVF, then that means that they can say they actually won't be able to claim that. And then so Taylor just asked, I'm wondering if you can speak to unknown donors and contracts surrounding that. I feel like there's a lot of fear mongering around legalities. So yeah, so I kind of touched on that already, but yeah, so for known donors and contracts, the legislation means that if you have something, even if you have like an email being like, hey, I would like for you to donate, not interested in co-parenting, and then they're like, yeah, no problem, I don't want to co-parent, I'm happy to just donate and be a donor. They have to say that they're a donor. Then they have no claim to parental rights. That was a legislative change that happened in 2017. And if you want to look at the actual legislation, it's called the All Families Are Equal Act. And that again is specific to Ontario. So I can't speak for any other province or for any other country. So hopefully that covers your question, Taylor. So asking a known donor or a known egg or sperm donor, you have to give the donor time to decide and tell them your timeline. Let them know, you know what, I'm really need to do this soon. I'm looking at the next 3 months. Are you available? Are you interested? Can we start talking about this? But also giving them time to figure this out, because this could mean and impact a lot of things in terms of their relationship with their families and their partners and things like that. Ensuring that everyone gets independent legal advice. So if, for example, they decide that they want to get legal advice, then they definitely should do that. And that's something that, especially for surrogacy, they have to. So if you're looking at someone who is going to donate their uterus and support you in carrying the child, it's a must. They have to get independent legal advice. Everyone does. You should also consider seeing a mediator or counselor together if that's something that is possible. What that will allow for is that it gives you the opportunity to actually talk through what's going on and what everyone is expecting. Sorry, I'm just checking time. Okay, we're good. And write up a contract if that feels better for everyone. So again, you don't need one technically, but it is always good to have one to make sure everyone is on the same page. And also thinking about how many times you want to try, right? So especially for an egg donor, if you were asking an egg donor to go through the process of actually getting their eggs and extracting them, that is a very invasive and very intense physical process, you want to think about how many times you're going to try that, depending on how many eggs they get. So if they only get 5 eggs and you try that with your sperm and it doesn't work out, that has to be a conversation around how many times you actually want to try before, and how much they're willing to try. Also thinking about how and what will be the method you will try. So whether that's through an IUI, and we're going to talk about all the different methods in a second, but how and what method will you be trying? And then also making sure that everyone has a say and understands their role. So if you were asking this donor to be a donor and that is it, they need to be understanding of that and understand their role in not only the child's life, but also in your life moving forward. Once pregnancy is happening and you are pregnant and you are going to give birth, you need to think about how you want that person to be in your life. So we're going to get into the process now and then the methods of how we're going to, now we have the egg, now we have the sperm, we have the uterus, we know what we're going to do. So this is what we're going to do. This is how we're doing this. So the first one is called ICI, or intracervical insemination. This is also known as DIY, doing it at home, the turkey baster I'm sure heard on TV, and then also home insemination. So there's 2 different ways in Ontario that you can do this. It is very different in the States, because in the States, they have different rules, and different provinces have different regulations around this. So I'm speaking specifically to Ontario. So on the top here, I don't know if, oh, whoops, what did I do here? I don't know if I can do a pointer. I don't know. I don't know if I can. Anyways, whatever, it's fine. Oops. How do I go back? Oh no, hold on. Oh my God. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the top here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but on the top here is a known donor. So if we're going to start with a known donor, we decide on the donor and buy sperm. Then we cycle monitor at home, which we're going to talk about in our next workshop. And then at the time of ovulation, you'll call the clinic and pick up the tank, meaning the nitrogen oxide, or I don't know science, but the tank that has the frozen sperm. You're going to go and pick it up at the time of ovulation. You're going to take the tank home. You're going to defrost it. You're going to fill the catheter up with sperm, and then you're going to inseminate at home. And then you wait for the 2 weeks for the pregnancy results. So that's possible in Ontario with an unknown donor. So that means you've bought sperm from a sperm bank, and then RepoMed is holding it for you. They're going to set it up for you in a tank, give you the instructions, you take it home and you do it yourself. So that's one option for at-home DIY. The other option is you have a known donor, so someone who is donating their material to you. You have an egg already in your family and a gestational carrier, or a person who wants to carry in their uterus, and you have already decided the sperm. So the sperm donor and you have already figured out timelines. You're doing that, you figured it out, okay, well, you know what, I'm ovulating most likely on this day because I've done the cycle monitoring here. Here is an option here that is important. So we talked about the testing for the donor. It is optional. So you can also, if you know this person and you're like, you know what, I don't really care, I don't need you to do all these tests, that's fine, we're just going to try and see what happens. You're also able to do that. The testing is also optional based on how you feel about your own body and what you're willing to do. And so then the egg or carrier, the egg person or the carrier person does the cycle monitoring. And then the donor provides a sample at ovulation. So that literally means like, hey, person, I'm ovulating like tomorrow. I need you to come and drop off a sample. So then the sample then happens, and they come over, drop it off, and then you immediately have to put it in to inseminate it. So that insemination then happens at home, and then you wait for the 2-week pregnancy results. So the thing with the unknown donor too, that I forgot to mention, is you can actually get more than one vial, right? So when you buy one tank, you can have multiple vials for multiple tries, and you want to be able to some people buy 2 vials, they inseminate on day 1 of ovulation, and then they inseminate the day after, because what that means is it gives you a better chance of potential pregnancy. And so the next possibility is intrauterine insemination, so an IUI. So the first thing here, I think I've got a question. So yeah, that's a good question, Taylor. Do all clinics allow you to pick up the tank and take it home? No. So this is a very specific program with RepoMed. So you would have to go specifically to RepoMed and talk to them there. They would be the place that would do it for you. And they have a really good program on their website. You can check that out. But not all clinics allow for this because remember also, and we're going to talk about fertility clinics in a bit, but the answer is no, not all. If you want a specific clinic and if you would like to work with a specific clinic, you could talk to them about how, if that is a possibility. But that means that they would have to have the tanks ready. They would have to have tanks to send home with you. It is a particular program that is offered right now through RepoMed. Okay, and then so for IUI, you start with a referral from your physician. So your family physician refers you to a fertility clinic, and then the clinic books you in for an appointment. Then you have a consultation with the fertility physician or specialist, and you create a plan for that. Then you do the assessment, the testing, and counseling. And so some STIs, as I said earlier, can impact fertility in your uterus. Make sure to have up-to-date testing on whatever is happening. So, if you have a uterus and cervix, then you want to get your pap smear, you want to get your STIs done, you want to get all those things done to make sure that you have your most up-to-date stuff. And then you want to do the fertility clinic will do blood tests to determine your follicle count. So cycle monitoring starts on day 1 of the menstruation cycle. And then on day 3, they do an ultrasound. And then depending on your blood work and internal ultrasounds, if you're inseminating that cycle, then the sperm needs to be delivered by day 5, because then by day 14, you're ovulating ideally, and then they're going to do the insemination. So the way that they do an insemination through an IUI is they actually take a catheter and they thread it through the cervix into the uterus. So this is it's inside the uterus already. What it does is it actually kind of bypasses the entire canal that goes through the cervix, and it goes directly into the uterus. And so what that allows for is for a potential for the sperm to meet the egg before like in an easier way. So it actually just kind of tries to make it a little easier for them to meet to create an embryo. You can do an IUI cycle either medicated or not medicated. So it could be no medication at all if you choose that. If you're having a hard time, if you've done a few IUIs and you're like, you know what, let's see if we need some support. They can give you medication to help amp up the amount of eggs that you produce, and then also to help with the uterine lining. So they can support you with that, with progesterone or other medications. And then once the IUI happens, after cycle monitoring and determining that you're ovulating, you are called into the clinic. Sperm is then thawed or provided if you have a known donor, and then the IUI is performed. And so exactly how I was explaining, they put the catheter through the cervix, and then they inject the sperm directly into your uterus. So the uterus has the sperm, and then hopefully the eggs will go, and then the sperm connects, and then you create an embryo, and then it attaches to the wall. So that's an IUI. And then there's IVF. So this is the big one that everyone has lots of questions for, and I'm really excited to talk about it. This is how I actually started my family, and I had my daughter through IVF. And so if you have any particular questions about this, please feel free to ask. So the way that it starts is you have a consultation. So usually in Ontario, and usually with doctors in fertility clinics, if you have not tried before with any other possibility, or if you have known fertility issues, they may ask you to try something else before you go to IVF. Some clinics are like, whatever, we don't care, just come. I did IUI before I did IVF, and based on my actual levels of a particular hormone called AMH, they were very low. And because they were very low, they were like, okay, you know what, you have a really low AMH, let's just get you right into IVF. And so I was able to actually get bumped up and start IVF very quickly, because I also only had 2 vials of a particular sperm that I wanted. So that's just a little information. This is a great question, so I'm actually going to take a pause on IVF and go back to this question. So Laura asks, can you do IUI with a midwife at home in Ontario? No, unfortunately, you cannot. That is a common question. And I actually did a lot of research on this last night because I thought you could, but you actually can't. So it's not allowed in Ontario. In the States, you can. So again, I did have a client once who actually went to the States found a midwife. Like she spent like, I think a month in the States. She found a midwife, and the midwife did the IUI at home. That was a very expensive process, but that's how she wanted to do it. But an IUI is specifically done in a clinic setting. A midwife, unfortunately, cannot do it at home, from my understanding. If anybody else knows different, please let me know. But I think that from what I've been told, and also because an IUI requires you to actually insert a catheter through the cervix, it is a very, like, it needs to be a very like sterile environment in order to do that. So
That's correct, Aruna.
yeah. So yeah, so there's, unfortunately we can't in Ontario, but again, in the States you can. So I mean, I'm not sure about other provinces, but I know that I had a client once who went to the States to get it done by a midwife because they were offering that over there. So that's something to consider as well. Yeah. So yeah, so so this is, so okay, so we're going to go back to IVF now. So for IVF, you do the consultation, and as I was saying, sometimes most likely you will need to get a consultation or a referral from either another, if you've been doing an IUI and it doesn't work, or if you've been trying many times at home and it hasn't worked, you can also opt for asking for an IVF consultation. So in the consultation, they'll assess, you know, have you tried, how many times, things like that. Do you have fertility issues? And then the next thing, if they will do baseline blood work and ultrasounds. That was the day one that I was talking about. Excuse me. So for the baseline, they're looking at how many follicles do you have, what are your hormone levels at the start of your menstrual cycle, what is going on internally. And then if you decide to go forward with it, then they start with the ovarian stimulation. And so that's not just like, so this when I saw this diagram, I was like, this very simplifies everything, but this is a very intense process. So I will show you another thing later on to kind of show the amount of drugs that you're taking. But to stimulate your ovaries, they actually have you on over 12 days of medication. So you're doing injectables, where you're injecting hormones directly to kind of amp up the amount of eggs that are produced. And so what that does is that then also allows for all these eggs to produce and then be matured. And then once you have a significant amount of eggs that are amped up and produced, and then you'll go into an egg retrieval. And so what the egg retrieval is it actually is you're under general anesthetic because you have to be completely put under, and then they insert a needle directly into your ovaries that extract the eggs. And so then when the eggs are extracted, then they take them out, and then they'll connect them on a petri dish. So in vitro just literally means on glass. So it will be on the glass itself, and then you can choose to do ICSI. And so ICSI is actually the manual process of someone literally taking a sperm and putting it into an egg. So it is like that's an option. Or what you can do is say you don't want ICSI, and you can opt for everything to just be on one petri dish itself, and then they find each other. So when you're at the IVF stage, you want to have the best options and the best like outcomes possible. And that's what they're always going to push for ICSI. That is an option. You don't have to do ICSI if you don't want to. The next step for that would be, before you do an embryo transfer, is you do genetic testing, if that is something you want to do. So there is something called PGS and PGD testing, which is they're going to test for different anomalies in the embryos itself. Sometimes what they're looking for specifically is this if they implant this embryo, if they put the embryo transfer back in, will it be a viable pregnancy? So there's sometimes you don't have to even look. I chose not to do genetic testing based on anything other than like a literal viable embryo, because I think that a lot of these testings are also very ableist. And so really having a conversation with yourself and your family around what is important for your family, and also thinking about like the ways in which genetic testing is also very ableist, is very important. And so what the testing can do though is say like, okay, well, if I transfer this embryo, is it going to is it going to lead to a miscarriage? Is it going to lead to not being a viable embryo? So that's an option for genetic testing. And then what they do is then once you're ready, and usually with IVF and the covered OHIP IVF, you have to be able within 2 months to transfer an embryo. You would then transfer the embryo back in. So they actually just kind of do like an IUI. They put the catheter through the cervix, and then they put the done embryo, the completed embryo, back into the uterus. And then you have a 2-week wait, and then you have your pregnancy test. And then for those embryos that you did not use, so embryo freezing for some reason is over here, but it should actually be over here where it says embryo transfer, because once you've transferred the embryo, if you want to freeze the rest of them, that's where you have the option to freeze them. And so this specifically is where you get either frozen sperm or sperm that you have from a known donor. And this is a very, again, simplistic diagram. I just want to also say that it's a very emotional process, and you have to think about also how hormones are going to impact your emotional wellness. And the ovarian and stimulation, and specifically the trigger shot that they give you, are done with lots of hormone doses and drugs. And so it's going to very much impact you. And so thinking about your own anxiety and mental health and mental health history, that's something to consider, how these are going to impact you, and also if you're on other medication. So yeah, so there are lots of complications that also could come from IVF. If you are doing a really high dose IVF, there is a possibility for hyperovarian syndrome, which is that you have made too many eggs, and that actually can really make you really sick. There's also reciprocal IVF, which we talked about before, which would mean that the person, so one parent who is going to donate the eggs or be the egg giver, but is not going to carry, would actually go through the whole process of egg retrieval. And then the embryo transfer would go to the partner who is going to be carrying. And so what that does is it means that both people have to then do some kind of drug manipulation in order to get both of you on the same cycle at the same time. Sometimes what happens also is you can opt to not do that. And one person can just do the ovarian stimulation, create the eggs, create the embryos, and then freeze the embryos, and then wait for the other partner to be ready to carry them. So that's what reciprocal IVF is. And that's an option for folks who have 2 uteruses and 2 sets of eggs, and have sperm either in their family or otherwise, and want to have one person carry the eggs, but then someone else donate them. And then also the costs. So specific to Ontario, every uterus in Ontario is covered for one cycle of IVF. So what that means is the process of doing the blood work, the ultrasounds, the doctor's appointments, the egg retrieval itself, where you're put under general anesthetic and they retrieve the eggs. That's also covered through OHIP. And then also every transfer. So let's say you transfer it once in that cycle, and then like 2 years from now, after you've frozen a few embryos, you want to have your second kid, and they transfer it again. That transfer again is covered. And then any other ultrasounds after that are covered as well. So that's all covered under IVF. What is not covered is the drugs. So the drugs can be upwards of $4,000 if you're doing the highest thing. And this is what I was talking about. So the thing on top, so this on top, the conventional IVF is the amount of drugs that you'd be taking on a regular IVF cycle. So as you can see, so you're already taking the injections before, and then the next cycle you're taking daily, I can't even say that word, gonadotropin injections and Lupron. And then you're taking that trigger shot. So that HCG injection is one that's going to actually trigger your ovulation to happen. And then you're going to do a sedation. And that's kind of the picture here on day 14 of what they're actually doing. They're taking out the eggs, and then they're placing it back in again through the catheter, through there. So, and then there's also, though, an option where you can do a natural IVF cycle. A lot of clinics won't do this because they actually want to get you like the most eggs, the most embryos, because then that's your most successful cycle to them. But a lot of folks will also opt for a very low drug one because they don't have fertility issues as much and they just want to, have one pregnancy. And so because it costs so much money though, it is something to consider, because if you do another IVF cycle, it can land you up to $15,000 to $25,000 per cycle. So that's something to consider, right? So if you want it, that's why a lot of people just go all in and they just do all the drugs and they just get the most embryos and they just freeze the embryos. But this is the difference between lots of a very highly conventional one and then a more natural, less fertility drugs cycle. Yeah. Are there any questions on IVF? The big one. Okay. So we're going to go into surrogacy, because surrogacy, I think, is a really important one, because a lot of folks, if you don't have a uterus to carry, but you have, let's say you have eggs and you have a sperm, or you just have sperm, or you don't have eggs or a uterus in your family, but you want to, to consider surrogacy, there are two types. There is traditional and there is gestational. So traditional means that the person who is going to carry in the uterus also provides the eggs. So that means that if I was going to be a traditional carrier for my sister, surrogate for my sister, I would say, okay, well, I'm going to use my eggs. I just need sperm from my sister's partner, and I'm going to create the embryo inside my body, and I'm going to have the baby. I'm going to carry the baby, and I'm going to birth the baby for my sister. That's a traditional one. The gestational one means that my sister's going to give me her eggs, or a donated egg. We're going to get a donated egg, and with their partner's sperm, and then I'm going to carry the baby in my uterus for them. I cannot get paid for any of this in Canada, but I can, just as I was saying before, for egg and sperm donations, I can be paid incidental costs. So anything that is that I have to pay for because of the surrogacy, then I can get paid for. So let's say I have to eat special food, or if I have to get particular supplements or medication, those things I can get paid, I can get reimbursed for, but I cannot get paid for the process or the service of me being a surrogate. It's important to also mention that fertility clinics will only do gestational. They will not do traditional, and that the carrier, the surrogate, must have independent legal advice no matter what type you're in. They can go through either of these pathways with known or unknown sperm donors. So let's say, for example, my sister didn't have access to sperm in her family, but she wanted to buy sperm from a sperm bank. She could do that with her eggs, create the embryo, and then give me the embryo to carry. Or she could choose the sperm donor. I could get pregnant with that one, and then I would carry. So you could do either or, but it is important to remember that if you're going to go down a fertility clinic route, not do a DIY at home with a surrogate if you don't have that connection with a surrogate, and you're going to go through a fertility clinic or a surrogacy agency, because there are agencies for surrogates, they will not opt to do traditional, because that changes a lot. And the egg, it changes it from being like they're just carrying a pregnancy that is outside of their body, as opposed to them using their own reproductive material. So it changes the whole game around the laws, and specifically around what fertility clinics will and won't do. Often also in surrogacy situations, especially if it's a family-based one, fertility clinics might also require that everyone in the family, or in whoever's playing different roles in the family, will have to get counseling and speak to a counselor, and a counselor will have to sign off saying that everyone understands what's happening in the situation. So yeah, so there's a lot involved, and a lot of things to consider if you're going down a surrogacy route. Fertility clinics. So I wanted to touch a little bit on fertility clinics, because if you are deciding to go down this route, it is really important to know, what you're getting into, and to think more about how we're going to talk about advocacy and what advocacy looks like. So I just want to remind people that fertility clinics are a business. They are private businesses. They are not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They are for-profits. They are businesses first and foremost. Oftentimes things that are covered by OHIP fertility clinics will figure out a way to charge, right? So, I mean, I have nothing against fertility clinics. I went to a fertility clinic. I had my kid through that. I know many people who do, but I think it's important for people who are going to go to fertility clinics to know what they're getting into before they do that. So, for an example of that, an IUI is covered by OHIP. What is not covered, though, is a washing of the sperm. So whether or not you have a known donor or an unknown donor, the fertility clinic will charge you upwards of $400 to wash the sperm. So what that means, and even if it's washed already, so unknown donors, so from a sperm bank, the sperm bank has already washed the sperm. What that means is you have semen usually when someone donates a sperm sample, and the semen includes like blood and pus and like all kinds of other like stuff that comes in the semen, but the sperm is then extracted from all that other stuff. So because when you're doing an IUI, what usually happens is the cervix, let's say, for example, you're doing an ICI and you're just depositing it into the canal, and then it goes up into the cervix. Usually what happens is only the sperm makes it through the cervix. And what that does is your cervix actually acts as like a seal or a protectant to protect the uterus from any of that other stuff getting in. When you have an IUI, if you don't wash the sperm, what that does is it actually means that all that other stuff is going into a very protected zone, aka your uterus, and you don't want that to happen. That's how infection happens, things like that. So they wash the sperm at sperm banks. Even if you get a washed sperm sample already from a sperm bank and you give it to your fertility clinic, they're going to charge you again because they want to wash the sperm again. Oftentimes it's not necessary, but they do it because that's how they make their money. So I just want to point that out because you might go into this being like, oh my God, IVF is free, no bigs, I'm not gonna have to pay anything. There will always be like other costs that they will figure out a way to charge you. So what is important is to figure out and talk to the clinic that you're talking to, and also call around, have appointments with different clinics and see which one makes most sense to you. The costs also vary. So, at one clinic, it could be $600, the other clinic could be $400. So you want to see like what makes sense for you and who is going to reflect what you and your family need the most. Unfortunately, clinics are also the only way to do IVF, and IVF funding is kind of doled out to every clinic depending on how big the clinic is and how many people they've done IVF for the year before. So the government kind of has a blanket amount, and then they give it depending on how many people. What that means is that a lot of fertility clinics have very long wait lists for covered and funded IVF. So if you're wanting to go through the IVF route, I would say that if that's something that you're considering, and you're still wanting to get pregnant in different ways. So like a lot of folks, what they do is they get themselves on a 2-year waiting list for a fertility clinic for IVF, while they're also trying through IUI or trying through home insemination. So, and then they might get pregnant, and then when the fertility clinic calls them, they're like, oh, I already had my baby, right? So you can take me off the list, or you can whatever. So that's something to consider around what path you want to take, and that fertility clinics do have waiting lists for particularly IVF, based on whatever funding they have. And then the last thing about fertility clinics that I will say is that oftentimes they have very particular rules and regulations around known donors and how and the partnerships between known donors. So a lot of queer and trans people have come forward with issues around fertility clinics not addressing or honoring the fact that there are two, for example, two women in a situation that are in a relationship. They have a known donor who is their friend that they don't have sex with, and then the fertility clinic is like, well, we have to go through a whole testing process. That means that it's like 6 months. We have to do testing. We have to do all these things because you're not having sex with each other. As opposed to if we were having sex with each other, then that would all get squashed and we could just do it immediately. So there is a lot of bias still in terms of how things are done with different configurations of families. And so you want to talk to your clinics about what is going to happen in your situation and what their rules and regulations are on their end, because again, that's very different across the board. And there are queer friendly and trans friendly fertility clinics, but again, they're not all trained the same way. A lot of times, sometimes people will have like a great experience and other people won't. It really depends on like who you get that day and how nurses are trained. So it's like There's so many things. So I would say, you know, if you and your family are considering a fertility clinic path, then to have conversations, and very like blunt conversations with these folks around like what you need, what you want, and what you're looking for, and see if that's something that they can give you. I hope that didn't sound like a rant against fertility clinics, because it's definitely not. And so our last thing, and I think this goes into what I was kind of saying, is, you know, considering also advocacy is such a huge part of who we are as LGBTQ2S community and people. We unfortunately need to really advocate for ourselves and each other a lot, because these systems are not designed for us. They're not meant for us. And so you have to consider how you want to engage in the medical system or not. And that really will depend on what you need in terms of creating your family. And so thinking about how you're going to, what you need, and then how you're going to get what you need, and then putting that together, and if that means you have to connect with the medical system or not. I would also say to take your time if you can. Everyone's situation is different. So, you know, comparing yourselves to other folks is not helpful, and often happens in these situations. It's really important going into this work and into this path and into this journey to build a really strong support system with family and friends and community and partners, and really thinking about what you need for yourself emotionally and physically, in terms of food, in terms of care, in terms of therapy, thinking about what you need for support. Also doing your research. So do your research around asking questions around people who have had babies or had experience in these fertility spaces or with different things, what worked for them, what didn't. And challenge and advocate if you can, you know, if you feel like you're in a position to challenge some of the things that people are doing in fertility clinics, please do that. And then it might take longer than you think. Oftentimes people are like, oh, we're just going to like try a few times and see what happens. And sometimes people end up trying for years. And so really thinking about what that toll is going to take on you, and what you're willing to do and what you're not, what your limits are, what your boundaries are with each other, and with yourself, and really honoring the process, and being flexible with whatever comes up, and then also centering your needs and honoring your feelings. And I think centering your needs and honoring your feelings are really important, because this is also about how you want to intend on creating your family and how you want to go into it. And really allowing for yourself to be as intentional as possible also means that starting off in that way is really a really beautiful process for how you continue your family. So those are some things that, you know, I think have come up for myself and also for folks who I've supported in family planning, that have been some things to consider. I think with that, I will say thank you. Thank you for your attention and your care and your questions. And I would really strongly, if you are considering this path, to feel free to join us for the fertility awareness and family planning mapping for everyone. That's happening on Saturday, August 21st, 2021, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And you can find all the information on the Seed and Sprout Facebook. We have all the events there, and also on the Birthmark website as well.